The first-year rookie on the court had no idea whom he had just pointed to. The summer camp organizers didn't know. The 3 assistant coaches sitting in the stands didn't know. The 40 players filling the Horace Grant High School gymnasium in Chicago didn't know. Only 5 people in the entire gym knew who that 30-something man in the corner of the court was. The man who had just been called the old guy. The man who had just been invited to step onto the court so a promising rookie could use him as a practice dummy. The man wearing a worn-out Bulls t-shirt, loose shorts, and sneakers that had seen better days. The most dominant player in the history of professional basketball was about to be humiliated in front of all the people he had always wanted to impress. His reputation, his legacy, everything he had built over 15 years in the NBA would be destroyed by an 18-year-old kid who had randomly picked him out of the spectators, a kid who dismissed him for looking old, a kid who assumed he knew nothing about high-level basketball. He picked the wrong man. It happened on the afternoon of July 12, 1998. This is the story that was never supposed to be told. Chicago, Illinois, Horace Grant High School. Sunday afternoon, July 12, 1998. The gymnasium had been transformed into an elite training camp. The smell of burnt rubber from sneakers, fresh sweat, and floor wax filled the air. It was the Chicago Summer Basketball Camp, not the biggest in America, but close. Participants from 12 different states, high school players with college scholarships already signed, some with professional contracts on the horizon. 40 of the country's top prospects. Coaches, scouts, parents, and family members. Everyone who mattered in the youth basketball scene was there that afternoon. The camp had started at 9 in the morning. 8 hours of intense drills, scrimmages, evaluations. The crowd was exhausted but electrified. The final event of the afternoon was about to begin, a special one-on-one session where the most outstanding players would showcase their skills. The event organizer had just called for volunteers. Anyone interested in basketball in the United States in 1998 knew the name Darius Mitchell. Darius was the #1 prospect in the country, a 6'5" shooting guard, 220 pounds of pure muscle. His high school record wasn't just impressive, it was superhuman. Averaging 38 points per game in his senior year, back-to-back state champion. He had already signed with Duke University, the most prestigious basketball program in the country. NBA scouts were already talking about him as a future #1 draft pick. His entire game strategy was built around a single weapon, a crossover so fast and devastating that no defender in the history of high school basketball had ever managed to stop it. His signature move, executed from the perimeter, without warning, without telegraphing. In one instant he was in front of you. In the next instant, he had already gone past and was slamming the ball through the hoop. Coaches who had studied his game said it was impossible to defend. Players who had faced him said they never saw the move coming. They only felt the wind as he went by. That afternoon, Darius was supposed to demonstrate that crossover, show the audience what made him unstoppable, maybe hit some spectacular shots, maybe play a little one-on-one with a predetermined teammate, receive the applause, shake some hands, go home. That was the plan. Darius stood in the center of the court. His Duke uniform was impeccable. Brand new Air Jordans shone under the gym lights. He held a microphone in his right hand. He had already been introduced. He had already received a standing ovation. He had already thanked the organizers, the coaches, and his peers. Now he was doing what champions do. He was showing off. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice filled the gymnasium effortlessly. The deep, confident voice of a young man who had never known failure because his talent spoke louder than any words. This afternoon I want to show you something. Something that will change your understanding of speed, your understanding of skill. 40 players leaned forward in the stands. My crossover is considered the fastest move in high school basketball. I'm not the one saying it. The records prove it. 2 state championships, 38 points per game average, and not once, has a defender managed to stop this move. Applause. Respectful. Deserved. Then Darius made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. But I don't want to just demonstrate it against air. Anyone can do crossovers with no defense. I want to show you how this move works against a real defender. A real person standing in front of me, trying to stop me. He paused, looked around. 40 faces stared back at him. I need a volunteer, someone who thinks they're quick, no matter where they come from, no matter their experience. Come on up, try to stop me. I'll go at 70%. No one will get hurt. I just want this audience to see what real speed looks like against a live defender. Silence. No one moved. The most experienced players in the stands knew better than to volunteer against Darius Mitchell's crossover. The proud ones ran the mental calculations. The numbers weren't encouraging. Darius waited 5 seconds. 10 seconds. The silence grew uncomfortable. The champion had called for a challenger, and the room stayed quiet. Darius's smile widened. He liked this part. The hesitation, the fear. It proved his point even before the demonstration began. Then his gaze landed on someone in the corner of the gym. An older man, maybe in his 30s. He was completely still while everyone around him shifted restlessly in their seats. He wasn't wearing a team uniform. No insignia. Nothing to indicate any connection to elite basketball. Worn Bulls t-shirt, baggy shorts, old sneakers. He looked like a spectator, a dad who had come to watch, not to participate. But something about that man caught Darius's attention. It wasn't his appearance, it was the way he watched. Not like a spectator watching a show, but like a student observing a master class, studying, analyzing, mentally taking things apart. Darius didn't think much of it. He needed a volunteer. That older man would be perfect. Old enough to make the demonstration dramatic. Ordinary enough to make the audience gasp. They would see that older figure next to the young champion. They would worry. And when Darius's crossover left him on the floor, they would explode in applause. Great entertainment. Great show. Darius pointed. You, the old guy in the corner, how about it? Want to see America's fastest crossover? Up close? Some people laughed. Darius was smiling. This was part of the show. The older man in the corner didn't laugh. He looked at Darius, looked at the finger pointing at him, looked at the court, the coaches, the crowd, the situation. Then he said one word. Sure. He said it the way someone accepts the salt being passed. No enthusiasm, no hesitation, no emotion whatsoever. The man seated next to him, a serious-looking assistant coach named Tim Grover, grabbed his arm, squeezed, leaned in close. Mike, don't do this. Michael Jordan looked at his personal trainer. His expression didn't change. He gently removed Tim's hand from his arm. He asked, Mike said quietly, it would be rude not to answer. Tim Grover closed his eyes. He knew what was coming. Not for Mike, for Darius. Michael Jordan rose from his seat in the stands and began walking toward the court. He moved with feline grace, calm, unhurried. People barely looked at him. He was just an older man walking to the court, a volunteer for a demonstration. No one special. In 1998, Michael Jordan was a ghost in Chicago. He had retired from the NBA for the second time just 3 months earlier, in April. No press conferences, no public appearances, no events. He was 35 years old. He had won 6 NBA championships, 5 MVPs, 10 scoring titles. Born in Brooklyn, raised in North Carolina, he had turned Chicago into the capital of world basketball for a decade. But in July 1998, he was taking a break. Training privately. Considering his future. No one expected to see him at a rookie summer camp. He had been invited to this camp not as a player, not as a guest of honor, but as a favor. Phil Jackson, his coach for 6 championships, had organized the event for young talent and asked Mike to stop by and observe. Just observe. Make some connections. See the new generation of talent. Not to play. Definitely not to play against the country's #1 prospect. When Tim Grover saw Darius Mitchell point at Michael Jordan, his stomach turned. He leaned toward the man sitting beside him. His voice was almost inaudible. Oh no. The man next to him frowned. What? It's Michael Jordan. Who's Michael Jordan? Tim Grover hesitated. He didn't know how to answer that question quickly. He didn't know how to summarize what he had witnessed over 10 years in a single sentence. So he said the only thing that seemed accurate. Darius just made the worst mistake of his life. Michael reached the court, walked to the center, and for the first time, Darius Mitchell and Michael Jordan stood face to face. The contrast was striking. Darius was young, muscular, full of youthful confidence. New uniform, shining sneakers, the arrogance of someone who had never lost. Michael was older, thinner than in his glory days, dressed casually. No uniform, no insignia, no team name, nothing. He looked like a dad who had wandered onto the wrong court. Darius extended his hand. Michael shook it. Darius noticed 2 things. First, Michael's handshake was exceptionally strong for a man his age, not crushing, but firm, like holding a steel bar. Second, Michael's hands were disproportionately large. The hands of a man who had done something very specific with them for many hours every day of his life. Darius paid no attention to either observation. Grip strength didn't stop crossovers. Big hands didn't close speed gaps. "What's your name, man?" Darius asked with condescension. "Mike." Nothing. The name meant nothing to him. Darius had never heard it in this context before. He had no reason to. "Do you play basketball?" "I used to." "What position?" "Shooting guard." Darius nodded. He had a formed opinion about older players in the 1998 youth basketball community. The old days were over. The game had evolved. Speed, athleticism, the skill of the new generation had left veterans behind. This guy probably played in college 20 years ago and thought he still had it. Darius turned to the audience. Microphone on. "Guys, we have a brave volunteer. Mike. He used to play shooting guard. Let's give him a round of applause for his courage." Polite applause. The audience felt sorry for the older man. They assumed he didn't know what he was getting into. They assumed he was about to have a very unpleasant experience with the fastest crossover in youth basketball. Darius turned to Michael, lowered his voice, man to man, privately. "Listen, I'm going to go easy. I'm not going to hurt you. You just need to stand there and try to react. Try to stop me or follow me. Do exactly what your training tells you, okay?" Michael nodded. "Don't worry," Darius added. "It'll be over quick." Michael Jordan looked at the young man who was 20 years his junior. The #1 prospect. The future of Duke. The crossover no one had stopped. "Yeah," Michael said. "It will." Something in Michael's voice made Darius pause for an instant. A fleeting impression he couldn't identify. Not exactly confidence. Darius had confidence. What he heard in Michael's voice was something else. Calmer. Deeper. It was certainty. Darius pushed the thought away. He stepped back, assumed his offensive stance. "I'm ready when you are," Michael said. He was still standing in the center of the court. No defensive stance, no crouched position. Hands at his sides, feet shoulder-width apart, completely relaxed, completely open. He looked like a man waiting for the bus. 40 people in the gym held their breath. The coaches leaned forward. Tim Grover, in the stands, clasped his hands. He couldn't watch. He covered his eyes with one hand, but spread his fingers because he couldn't look away either. Darius Mitchell, the #1 prospect, the fastest crossover in youth basketball, 6'5", 220 pounds of pure elite, trained, tested, proven talent. He bounced the ball twice, shifted his weight, and executed his legendary crossover against the old guy who looked like just any dad. What happened next lasted less than 2 seconds, but it would take the rest of this story to explain. The gym erupted with life. 40 people talking at once. Heated discussions broke out between the rows. Basketball players shook their heads, trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed with everything they had been taught. Some stood up. Others leaned over the bleachers to tap their neighbor's shoulder. The energy in the room had shifted from conversation to something entirely different. Something electrifying. Something dangerous. The kind of energy that fills a room when a fundamental belief is challenged and no one knows what to believe anymore. On the court, Darius Mitchell and Michael Jordan were still a meter apart. Darius's chest was still rising and falling with effort, not physical, but emotional, the effort of having to reorganize his self-image in front of 40 people. Michael remained still, patient. He gave Darius space to process what had just happened. There was no triumph on Michael's face, no satisfaction, no show of skill. He looked like a surgeon who had just completed a procedure. Calm, professional. Aware that it takes time to process the information he had just delivered. Tim Grover rose from the stands. He felt the moment, understood what was happening in that room. 40 basketball players had just had their worldview shaken, and such shocks could have 2 outcomes. It could spark curiosity or anger. Tim needed to guide the audience toward curiosity. He walked to the court and took the microphone from Darius's hand. Darius released it without resistance. His demonstration that afternoon was over. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tim's voice was warm and authoritative, the voice of a man who had spent 20 years building bridges between basketball communities. "What you just saw is extraordinary. For those who don't know, this gentleman is Michael Jordan. He's a former professional basketball player. He played for the Chicago Bulls for 15 years. He won 6 NBA championships. Murmurs ran through the audience. Some of the younger players had never seen Jordan play live. They had heard the name, but they didn't fully understand who he was. "Mr. Jordan, would you be willing to talk more about this for this audience?" Perhaps explain what we just saw or demonstrate some of the principles behind your approach. Michael looked at the audience. 40 faces stared back. Some curious, some skeptical, some hostile. He could feel the rejection in the air. These were young players, dedicated talents who had spent years perfecting their craft. And an older man in street clothes had just suggested that their craft had limitations. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Michael understood. He had swallowed similar pills years earlier when his own assumptions were shattered by experience. "I'd be happy to," Michael said. Then Tim handed him the microphone. And for the next 20 minutes, Michael Jordan gave an impromptu talk and demonstration that would be talked about in basketball circles for the next 6 decades. He began simply, respectfully. He understood his audience. He didn't want to insult their game. He didn't want to devalue their training. He wanted to show them something they had never seen before and let them draw their own conclusions. "What you just saw," Michael began with a clear, deliberate voice that carried effortlessly through the gym, "wasn't magic. It wasn't superior talent. It wasn't luck. It was reading. Simple reading applied to basketball in a way most young players never learn." He paused to let the idea sink in. "Darius has an excellent crossover. Truly excellent. Fast, powerful, technically perfect. But his move has a flaw. Not a flaw in execution. A flaw in the telegraph. Every move in modern basketball begins with a preparation. A weight shift, a shoulder twitch, a glance. These preparations last a tiny fraction of a second, but they are visible. They are readable. And if you can read the preparation, you know the move before it happens." The players in the stands shifted uncomfortably. Michael was describing something everyone knew instinctively but had never put into words. Michael continued. "In the basketball I played, what we called reading basketball, the goal is to anticipate, not react. Reaction is always slower than action. But anticipation, reading, that puts you one step ahead." He demonstrated. He asked Darius to try the crossover again. This time, Michael narrated what he was seeing. "Look at his shoulders. Before the ball moves, his shoulders tilt slightly left. That tells me he's going right. Look at his eyes. He looks where he wants to go before he moves. Look at his feet. His right foot turns 5 degrees before the crossover starts." Darius executed the move. Michael didn't just stop it. He stole the ball cleanly. The audience gasped. "This isn't speed," Michael said. "It's reading, and reading is a skill that can be learned." Over the next 15 minutes, Michael demonstrated concept after concept. Each one was simple. Each one was revolutionary to an audience trained in modern basketball. He demonstrated anticipatory defense. He asked Darius to try different moves, and each time, Michael was already there. Not because he was faster, but because he read Darius's body cues before the move began. He demonstrated the mental game. He explained how to create doubt in the opponent's mind, how to make them overthink, how to control the pace of the game not with speed, but with timing. He demonstrated movement efficiency. He showed how every step, every turn, every change of direction had to have purpose. "Young players make too many movements," he said. "They think more is better. But in elite basketball, less is more. One perfect move beats 10 good moves." "See?" Michael said. "I didn't use an elaborate crossover. I didn't jump over him. I didn't make a spectacular move. I just read his position, found the angle, and executed. Elite basketball isn't about being flashy. It's about being effective." Michael addressed the audience one last time. His voice had changed. It sounded warmer now, less clinical, more personal. "I want to make one thing clear. I'm not here to belittle modern basketball. The game has evolved. Your athleticism is incredible. Darius is an exceptional player. His dedication, his technique, his high school success, these are achievements that deserve deep respect." He paused, looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "But if you want to grow, if you want to evolve, if you want to discover what you're truly capable of, you have to be willing to look beyond what you already know. Every generation has its strengths. Every generation has its limitations. The question isn't which generation is better. The question is, are you willing to recognize your own limitations? Are you brave enough to admit that your system doesn't have all the answers? Because the moment you admit that, the moment you open yourself to learning, you become dangerous, not because of what you know, but because of what you're willing to discover. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It wasn't the applause of an audience appreciating a performance. It was the sound of 40 minds that had been forcibly opened. Some of them would close those minds again by morning. They would return to their routines, their drills, their signature moves, and convince themselves that what they had seen was a one-time anomaly. But some of them would never close their minds again. Some of them would stay awake that night, replaying what they had seen over and over, feeling the cracks in their worldview widen like a door, and some of them would step through that door, and their basketball would never be the same. Tim Grover took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Jordan." The applause lasted 45 seconds. Michael gave a small, precise bow. Respectful. No theatrics. He left the court, walked back to the stands. In the crowd, people reached out to touch his arm, shake his hand, ask questions. He responded to each gesture with a nod, a word, a brief glance, but kept walking back to his seat, back to Tim. Tim shook his head, smiling. The smile of a man who knew what was going to happen, who had seen it happen, and still couldn't believe it. "You enjoyed that," he said. "He challenged the game," Michael replied. "He needed to understand." "Oh, now he understands." "We'll see," Michael said. And something in his voice suggested the story wasn't over yet. The camp ended an hour later. The gym slowly emptied. Players packed up their gear. Families gathered their kids. Coaches collected their clipboards. But the conversations in that room had nothing to do with the camp results. Every conversation revolved around the same thing. The older man, the crossover that got stopped, the reading that beat speed, the 20 minutes that rewrote the rules. Darius Mitchell was still the #1 prospect that afternoon. His Duke scholarship remained intact. His future awaited him. But he didn't go to the parking lot with the others. He went to the stands. Michael Jordan was putting a small bag in the back seat of a rental car. Tim Grover was sitting in the driver's seat, waiting. The engine was running. The afternoon air was warm for July. The parking lot was half empty. Darius approached, still wearing his Duke uniform, still wearing his new Air Jordans. He didn't have his confidence with him. He had left it on the court. "Mr. Jordan." Michael turned, saw Darius, waited. "I owe you an apology. I picked you from the crowd because I thought you were old, because I thought you were nobody, because I wanted to use you to make myself look impressive." Michael said nothing. He let Darius speak. "For 4 years, I believed I was the best, #1 prospect. I thought that meant something. I thought it meant I understood basketball. I didn't understand. I understand high school basketball. I understand youth tournaments. I understand stats and rankings. But this afternoon you showed me something that doesn't know stats, doesn't know rankings, doesn't know titles. Something real." Darius paused. The parking lot was quiet. Somewhere in the building, someone was turning off the gym lights. "Can you teach me that?" Michael studied him the same way he had studied him on the court. Not his stance, not his technique, his eyes. What was behind them? What had changed? "You don't need a new teacher," Michael said. "You need a new question." "What question?" "For 4 years you've been asking, how do I win?" That's the wrong question. The right question is, what don't I know? The moment you ask that question honestly, every person you meet becomes your teacher. Every game you play becomes your classroom. You don't need me for that. You just need the courage to feel uncomfortable. Darius stared at him, the prospect who had never lost a big game, the young man who, an hour earlier, believed he was untouchable. He extended his hand. Michael shook it. "Thank you," Darius said, "for the lesson." "Thank you," Michael replied, "for the invitation." He got in the car. Tim Grover looked at him. Michael stared straight through the windshield. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the hood. "You know what's going to happen now," Tim said. "Everyone in that room is going to tell someone, and those people are going to tell someone else. Next month, every basketball player in America is going to know your name again." Michael stayed silent for a moment. Then he said something Tim Grover would remember for the rest of his life. Something that said everything about Michael Jordan, his philosophy, his ambition, his understanding of what had just begun. "Good," Michael said. "Then next time they won't have to ask who I am?" He pulled out of the parking lot. Horace Grant High School shrank in the rearview mirror. Inside, 40 people were still talking about what they had seen. They would talk about it tomorrow. They would talk about it next week. They would talk about it for the next 60 years. Because on July 12, 1998, a basketball rookie pointed to an older man in the corner of the gym and said, "You, the old guy, come here." He didn't know he had picked Michael Jordan. Now the whole world would know again.